All right, high rollers, this is a big thrill for me. Our guest today has quite a story. He's a professor at the Art Institute of Chicago, teaches writers, helps them in their career. His career, absolutely stellar. The author of 10 books, if I'm counting correctly, and he penned two of the greatest poker books all time, both of which I own, both of which I've read, Cowboys Full, and the renowned, positively Fifth Street, Murderers, Cheetahs, and Binion's World Series of Poker. Oh, and he almost won the main event. Yes, he did. He almost won the thing. James McManus, our guest today. Welcome to the show, James. It's a real honor. Thank you.
I'm very happy to be with you, Derek.
Listen, I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on the world's biggest news story right now, Donald J. Trump winning the presidency. A, what do you think? And B, with his casino background, what do you think that means for poker or gambling in general?
I don't know how much time we have to talk about it. I'm not a Trump fan. I respect that he has won the election. The most galling thing to me about all the graciousness and cooperation that the Democrats, the president, Secretary Clinton, have shown him is that if Hillary had lost the popular vote, but somehow squeaked through an electoral college victory, he would be complaining that that was rigged, that that was unfair, that the electoral college should be retroactively eliminated. And he counts on other people's good faith and spirit of cooperativeness. But during the campaign, he made it very clear that if it was a close call and he didn't like the results, he would not respect the rule of law and he would not be cooperative. He'd probably sue for a recount and on and on. So I'm glad that we are cooperating with him, but I wish that he would have indicated that he would have done the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's very contentious, isn't it? I just did a video about poker players and their tweets in reaction to the Trump win, and a lot of upset poker players today.
I have no idea what his position will be with respect to online poker being taxed and licensed. He is a practical person. He certainly doesn't seem to have any moral qualms about the casino industry. But there are powerful elements in American politics lining up to keep online poker from being legal. Anyway, it would be wonderful if he and the Republicans were willing to push through a legalization law to repeal the UIGEA.
Yeah, we're going to see what happens. And again, lots of controversy, protests going on all over the place. A very polarizing figure in the world of politics, to use a poker term. In Cowboys Full, if you haven't got this book in your poker collection, you got to get it. It's a very thick book. And you delve into the great history of cards, gambling, poker. You go thoroughly into politics and poker, some of the past presidents that have played the game. I mean, poker is an American pastime, isn't it?
I think it's the American pastime. More people watch football, but many, many, many more people play poker than the numbers who play tackle football or hardball baseball. It's the mind sport in which most Americans, and now people all over the planet, since the book came out in 2009, the game is much bigger in Europe now than it is in the United States, or at least as big over there and in the Pacific Rim countries. Basically, all the countries, all the free market democracies have taken up poker with tremendous enthusiasm.
And you delve into the past presidents. I mean, were you surprised in your research how much poker plays in politics? I mean, they go hand in hand, don't they?
Well, most of the presidents since the game was invented have played poker, and they weren't embarrassed to admit it. I mean, often they were quite proud. FDR played poker in the White House, Truman. Only in the 50s, when Eisenhower and Nixon, probably the two best poker players among American presidents, denied having played because at that time it was considered to be something immoral, that it was mere gambling. It was not widely understood that it was a game of skill, and they preferred to keep it a secret. The current president, Obama, played, like most of the presidents do, for very low stakes as a way to break the ice with political opponents, Republicans and Democrats sitting down on Friday evening to play a game of poker. It wasn't a high-stakes
read a quote from Nixon, and he says, if you can't hold your hand in a first class poker game, you're not fit for the presidency. I mean, that kind of sums it up for him, doesn't it? He's a gambler.
Yeah. I don't think it was Nixon who said that. I think that somebody said that about Nixon. I would have to refer myself to my own book.
I always wanted to ask you about that book, Cowboys Full. I mean, it must have taken you quite some time to write it, to put it together. How long did it take you? And when you were done, what was your lasting impression of what it said to you about gambling and about poker in general?
How did I write it? It took me about 4 years.
Wow.
Almost certain. It would have taken much longer than that, pre-internet and pre-Amazon search function. Amazon has shut down that service since then, but when I was writing the book, you could take any book published about a general or a president or a secretary of state or any politician, biographies of them, go to the Amazon search function and type in poker, and you would immediately be at the page. You'd be taken to the page where the information about how much poker they played, what the stakes were, who they played against, and so on. So instead of schlepping to the library and taking out a lot of books and skimming through them to find the poker passages, I could just sit at my desk, go through every president, every presidential biography, every military commander's biography, and certainly during the Civil War, all the generals and presidents on both sides played a lot, and it inflected their tactics on the battlefield and politically. So without this Amazon search function and Google, it would have taken me, I'm guessing, roughly 8 or 9 years, because it's 600 pages and there's a lot of information.
Well, it's an unbelievable undertaking. Thank you for doing it. I really enjoyed that book. Before we get to Positively Fifth Street, I want to get your thoughts on the WSOP main event. I guess you were tuning in to watch parts of it, maybe all of it. Key Win, the 2016 world champ. This guy was on fire. He was super aggressive. And to be honest, this was very exciting to watch from where I stand.
I enjoyed the broadcast thoroughly. He played really well. I mean, we've had, since they started broadcasting it almost live in November, the quality of play has been uniformly excellent. Martin Jacobson, when he won, even when, who's the guy who won last year?
Joe McKeon. Joe McKeon.
I mean, he's a strong player, and he happened to get lucky. I think one of the things that has been revealed this year as well is that it's clearly a game of skill, because most of the pots are won without a showdown. And we saw him take pot after pot with no hand at all. And also, luck does play a factor. The beautiful thing about poker is that it's a combination of luck and skill, like most of life. You need to be skillful, you need to be smart, but you also have to get lucky in key situations, job-wise, romantically. The way we make our way in the world, or fail to, is that we're a little short on the luck end or the skill end.
You talk about the final tables and how skillful the players have actually played during these November 9s. You've been playing poker a long time. What have you noticed to be the key difference over the years? How would you describe that skill level difference?
Well, I've only been playing tournament poker since 2000. The main event that I played that year was the first tournament I ever played. And, I got very lucky. I certainly wasn't the fifth best poker player in the world in 2000. I had been playing poker since 1960, so I had a lot of experience in the game. But I didn't, the tournament structure is very different from live poker, and the skill level at the World Series with a $10,000 buy-in was, it's pretty high, especially back in the days before you could qualify on online satellites. The differences between then and now is that enormous differences in those 16 years. The fact that when the number of people entering the event passed 500, eventually went to 512, people's jaws were dropped all over Las Vegas. That more than 500 people would show up to play a $10,000 buy-in event was shocking. Whereas today, easily 10 times that many players, sometimes 15 or 18 times. more than that. It's become much more difficult to win the event because there's so many people playing it. At the same time, it's easier to get a bracelet because instead of 2 or 3 bracelet events as there were in the original days of the World Series, now there are 65 or 70 if you count the European or Pacific Rim extensions of the World Series. And the other thing was that in 2000, I was 49. I was the average age. The average age of that final table was 49, and that's the age that I and Umberto Brenes were. Whereas today, it's very rare for somebody under 30 to make a final table. And the vast majority of people who sign up for these events are quite young because you could learn how to play online by playing 10 or 15 tables at a time. You can accumulate as many no-limit hold'em hands in 2 or 3 years playing in your dorm, for example. It used to take road gamblers 10 years, 15 years to get that much experience.
Well, you mentioned the year 2000. You talk about having luck in life, romance, and poker. That brings me to positively Fifth Street. It's one of the all-time greats. You know, we've had Nolan Dalla on, we've had Michael Craig on, guys who have authored some great poker books. When I talk about the top 3 poker books, I personally talk about Positively Fifth Street, Professor, the Banker, and the Suicide King, and One of a Kind. I mean, they're my 3 favorites in no particular order. They're just great books. And with luck, you go there to cover the Ted Binion murder trial in 2000. You play a satellite, you win the satellite, and you finish 5th in the World Championship. I mean, that was incredible.
Yeah, I finished 5th on Thursday, and Friday morning the verdict, the guilty verdict against Rick Tavish and Sandy Murphy comes through. So it was, I'm going back and forth between the trial, which is 2 blocks from the Horseshoe downtown. So the poker action's going on, the trial's being covered on the TVs overhanging the tables because, you know, the owner of the hotel, Becky Binion, her brother's murderers were on trial. So it was a pretty astonishing sequence of events. Meanwhile, I'm trying to do quote-unquote research at the strip clubs in order to get a better line on what was going on between Ted and Sandy. A lot of things fell into line in order to make that book.
That's not your ordinary trip to Vegas, James.
No. I've come to appreciate it. It was my first poker trip. I'd been to Vegas for other reasons, and I had played some cash games at the Bellagio and the Horseshoe and some other places, but it was my first trip to Vegas to play a poker tournament.
That's the year that Chris Ferguson wins. I mean, T.J. Kluche was right down there in the mix. What were your feelings as you were sitting there with some of the top names in poker, I mean, legends, and there you are navigating the field? I mean, you must have been nervous. I mean, you're close, right?
You know, you would think, and I would think that I would have been nervous. I felt so content. I felt like this is what I've been wanting to do this since the early 1970s. And the fact that I was there and I was winning felt, because I late on the second to last night, I was the trip leader, and it just felt natural. You know, I didn't fully appreciate hardly at all how lucky I had been to be the chip leader after 3 days. But I didn't feel terribly nervous. I felt, you know, when the cars were running my way, I thought it was going to be like this every year. You know, I've since come to realize that I was on a heater to end all heaters. But at the time, I felt pretty serene about everything.
What kind of guy was Ted Binion?
You know, I never met Ted. I identified with him. He and I were virtually the same age, and we were attracted to women like Sandy Murphy. You know, we were married guys with kids, and the temptations of Vegas for him were much more overwhelming because he actually lived in Vegas. And, you know, he's a rock and roll, poker playing dude whose dad happened to own the casino where the World Series of Poker was played. And he had the money to indulge himself in some recreational drugs that he got addicted to. And he was able to spend a lot of time at strip clubs and be in the executive lounges he had a really good old time until it stopped, and he ended up with the wrong woman, and he got very unlucky. But part of my thinking was that but for the grace of God go I, even though I don't believe in God. I could have been in Ted Binion's shoes if I lived in Las Vegas. So I sort of had a small taste of his lifestyle, but I came home and lived to tell the tale.
People often forget that in 2006, you almost took down the NBC Heads Up. You got to the quarterfinals, so you proved to the world that you do have some game, that 2000 just wasn't a one-off.
No, I've made 5 final tables, and I've done fairly well. But in my case, I'm not nearly good enough to make tournament poker profitable. I do okay in home games and cash games, but the expenses to beat the rake and the travel expenses as a tournament pro is something that I really wanted to be able to do, and it didn't work out. The numbers are pretty stacked against you. I don't think there's more than 300 or 400 or 500 people in the world who make a substantial living playing poker tournaments. I'm very fortunate in that my interest in poker can also get expressed in my writing. I teach courses in the history of poker, and so I'm able to. I never lose money when I'm writing about poker, and of course, like all tournament players, I've lost a lot of money trying to get some results in those larger events.
I was watching an interview with Andrew Roble one time, and he mentioned his day routine, that the first thing he does in the morning over cornflakes is read his hand histories. And I thought to myself, how am I supposed to compete with that? I mentioned
Yeah.
I mentioned Michael Craig and Nolan Dalla and their books. What did you think of their books, and what are some other poker books that you like? I recently read Des Wilson's Ghost at the Table. I mean, there's some good stuff out there.
Oh, there's amazing books out there. I mean, I'm good friends with Michael and Nolan. I love both those books. Of course, Nolan's was co-written with Peter Olson, who has written 2 other wonderful poker and or gambling stories. Take Me to the River is Peter's account of his 2007, I believe, World Series of Poker as his daughter River was being born. The one book that you certainly have to read is actually 2 books. Al Alvarez's The Biggest Game in Town and Tony Holden's book, Big Deal. Alvarez is writing about 1982, and Tony's writing about, I think, 1990. So I would put those very close to the top, or if not at the top of the list. Alvarez and Holden, and Peter Olson's a wonderful poker writer. Poker Faces by David Hayano is an account of what poker pros' lives consisted of. It's sort of an anthropological study of cash players out in Gardena, California in the 70s. One of the advantages of picking up Cowboys Full is that there's a long bibliography of the books that I consider to be the best poker books. So I recommend that you check those out.
Yeah, I do too. I'm gonna take you up on that offer. There's one there, Take Me to the River, I believe you said it was. Never heard of that. I'm gonna check that out.
I predict that you will enjoy them.
All right, thank you so much. Lastly, I mean, you're off the top. We mentioned that you still teach, you still write, you still play poker. You got a love affair with all of these things, and are they all equal, or is teaching or writing your favorite?
There's nothing like getting a student to express themselves better than they ever had before. Maybe even publishing their own first book. I've had that thrill many times. I was David Sedaris' first writing teacher, and he's gone on to become the Mark Twain of the 20th and 21st centuries. There's nothing like having a big stack late in the tournament. I'm working on a novel about that experience. I'm sort of doing a fictionalized version of the Positively Fifth Street experience in the year 2016. And what was the other one? Writing. Writing, when you have a book on the Times bestseller list and people are talking about it and reading it and having fun with it and arguing about it and saying it sucks or saying it doesn't suck, that's a great experience too. So they feel all of a piece to me, to teach and write and play. That's what my life has become. And I enjoy doing all 3 quite a bit.
And lastly, I got to put you on the spot because you just mentioned it. This fictionalized version of Positively Fifth Street. You got a name for it yet? When can I expect that? I want to read that.
It's coming out in an anthology called, there's an anthology coming out during the main event of 2017. It's called He Played for His Wife and Other Poker Fictions, and Other Poker Stories. It's all new material by poker writers. And my story, which is also drawn from the novel that I'm working on, is called Good Luck, Everyone. It's that phrase that dealers say almost universally when they first sit down at the table and then they get up and walk away. It's never made very much sense to me to wish everybody at the table good luck. And so that is the title of the book that I'm working on.
James McManus, man, this has been a real thrill. Thanks for taking time out. Really appreciate this.
Derek, it's my pleasure. And I loved your country, and if I was a little bit younger, I got married to my wife Jennifer in Canada, and we love and respect your country and your Prime Minister.